Major breaking news. It seems that a hostage deal is pretty imminent to essentially end the war in Gaza, or at least a part of it. The terms of this deal are pretty simple. There are three phases. Phase one would include 33 hostages released. None of them have to be confirmed deceased, meaning that it can't be that we already know that they're dead, but some of them could be dead. The IDF would begin a staged withdrawal, keeping a Gaza security perimeter. Terrorists with life sentences released, excluding October 7th Nukba fighters. When it says just terrorists, plural, it means multiple hundreds of terrorists, and even some rumors are saying that it's over 1,000 terrorists. And these are people that, the other side calls them political prisoners, when in reality, they actually did commit terror acts. Last 42 days, some IDF presence in the Philadelphia corridor. So the first stage would last 42 days. Phase two would be talks on more hostage releases, and further IDF withdrawals start on day 16. Security protocols for Palestinian returnees to northern Gaza. So that's phase two. Phase three would be all hostages released. The IDF withdraws fully only after their freedom. So essentially, Hamas survives. I'm sure you got that part of the deal. CNN reports what we know about the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal. So this is a report that they just put out. The Israeli government and Hamas say they are in the final stages of indirect talks over a deal for a ceasefire and the release of the hostages held in Gaza and Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. So they call the Palestinian terrorists that committed acts of terror, they call them prisoners. Okay. Not terrible. They didn't call them political prisoners, but they did call them prisoners. The agreement is set to be implemented in three phases, the first of which would last 42 days. So we already heard this. I'm just reiterating. The deal will deliver the first reprieve from the war, from war to the people of Gaza in more than a year, and only the second time since the Hamas October 7th, 2023 attack. So this is technically the second time that we had a ceasefire, as there was a ceasefire in the past, as well as a hostage deal in the past. Again, they sort of reiterate how many prisoners, hostages would be released. They say that it would be women, children, and men over the age of 50 and wounded people. So women and children, and then men over the age of 50. Israel would release many hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in exchange, an Israeli official said, including Palestinians convicted of killing Israelis. So Israel is going to be releasing murderers to these to Hamas murderers. Israel has not yet committed to the exact number of prisoners it will release, the official said, because Hamas has not yet said how many of the 33 hostages are still alive. Israel has agreed to release a large number of Palestinian prisoners for live hostages than for the bodies of the deceased. So obviously, the live hostages are more important. Palestinian civilians in Gaza would be allowed to freely return to the north of the Strip, an Israeli official told CNN, saying that there would be unspecific security arrangements in place. The Israeli military would be withdrawing its population centers during the first phase, but would remain along the Gaza-Egypt border known as the Philadelphia corridor. Israel would also maintain a buffer zone inside Gaza along the border with Israel, the size of which has been one of the final sticking points in the negotiations. The deal is expected to include the release of 5 female Israeli soldiers held by Hamas in the first phase of the agreement, each of whom would be exchanged for 50 Palestinian prisoners, including 30 convicted militants who are serving life sentences. So think about that. They talk to us about, one Palestinian life being worth one Israeli. Well, it seems that, according to them, one Israeli is worth 50 Palestinian lives. So they drive a very, very hard bargain. It seems that Israel is not getting a great deal here. Defense Minister Smotrich and Ben Gvir are very angry about this deal, calling it a catastrophe. Ben Gvir said recently that he will dismantle the government if this deal goes through. He admits openly to preventing hostage deals in the past, and he urges his fellow, his right-wing minister Bezalel Smotrich, to resign from the government if hostage deal goes through. So the right wing in Israel is making very clear where they stand on this deal. We definitely did not achieve the goal set out by initially the initial part of the war. Ben-Gvir even wrote a lengthy tweet in criticism of the deal. He said, "The deal that is being formed is terrible. I know the details of it well. It includes the release of hundreds of murderous terrorists from prisons, the return of Gazans, including thousands of terrorists, to the northern Gaza Strip, withdrawals from the IDF from the Netzarim axis, the returns to the threats to the residents of the encirclement, thus effectively erasing the war achievements that have been achieved with much blood by our fighters so far in the Gaza Strip. Not only that, it does not lead to the release of all the hostages and seals the fate of the remaining hostages who are not included in the deal to death. This is not a hard choice that must be made to return the kidnapped. It is a conscious choice at the cost of lives of many other Israeli citizens who unfortunately will pay the price of this deal with their lives. We've already seen the fruits of these deals in the past. We learned the hard way that there is no cover for all the promises that we will get along later." What he's referring to probably is the Gilad Shalit deal, which saw the return of one Gilad Shalit for about, I think, 1,000 hostages, and three of those, or one or two of those, were actually ended up being the leaders of Hamas. So he's saying, we've done this in the past, and it didn't work. He continues, "Over the past year, through our political power, we have managed to prevent this deal from coming to fruition time after time. However, since then, additional elements have been added to the government who now support the deal and no longer constitute a balancing act." What he's probably referring to is Gideon Sa'ar joining the government, enabling basically the government to continue even if Ben-Gvir would resign. Again, he continues, "This means that the prime minister will refrain from signing the deal only if the force opposing it is large enough to prevent him from doing so. The power of Otzma Yehudit, which is his party, is not sufficient in the current composition of government to constitute a lever of pressure to prevent the deal, and our withdrawal alone will not prevent its implementation. Therefore, I call on my friend, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, to join me in full cooperation against this terrible deal being crafted, and to inform the Prime Minister clearly and firmly that if the deal goes through, we will resign from the government together. I emphasize, even if we are in position, we will not bring down Netanyahu, but this move is our only chance to prevent its implementation, and in fact to prevent the surrender of the state of Israel to Hamas. After more than a year of bloody war, in which over 400 IDF soldiers fell in the Gaza Strip, and to ensure that their deaths will not be in vain, along with this, I call on the Prime Minister to come to his senses. I call on the Prime Minister to come to his senses and take steps that will lead to the defeat of Hamas and the release of our hostages without abandoning Israel's security, completely stop the transfer of humanitarian aid and fuel, electricity, and water to Gaza, along with continuing the military crushing of Hamas until its complete defeat. He said that along with a video on X earlier today. The reason why I'm bringing that to you is that the internal politics of Israel are really just as important, if not more important, than essentially, I would say, what the American government is telling Israel to do, or what foreign countries are telling Israel to do, or what Shelley on campus is telling Israel to do. At the end of the day, Israel has to act in its own interests, and hopefully they will. Now, again, this is pretty much all we know about the deal so far, that it's going to be 3 stages. There's going to be 33 hostages released in the first one. There's going to be a bunch of prisoners released, and essentially it's not like, it's going to be enacted tomorrow and the war is going to be over tomorrow, but it does mean that the war is probably winding down. So you have to understand that Netanyahu is under terrible pressure right now from both sides, from the left, from the right in Israel, and essentially he has no good choices. So whatever he decides, you just got to sort of live with it. I am definitely opposed to this deal. I think most right-wing, conservative, and sane thinking individuals would be opposed to this deal because, again, like Ben Gvir said, it renders everything that Israel has done so far essentially pushed to the side. The idea that an international agreement will form after this, war is BS, and Hamas will continue to rule the Gaza Strip and rearm and continue its war against Israel. For more, subscribe to this channel, and we'll keep you updated on any developments that happen. But that was just a brief overview of what this hostage deal would look like. Thank you, and have a good one.